The following video is for informational purposes only. It is simply the opinion and experience of myself regarding solar. It is not meant to be investment or tax advice. I am not an electrician. I am not and have never been in the solar industry. I am not being compensated by anyone to promote any products. It is always best to consult an expert before making any decisions regarding investments, taxes, and solar. So in this video, I want to talk about how my solar and battery system handle a grid down situation. Now, what is a grid down situation? Well, if your home or your apartment is most likely connected to the grid, there's probably 99.9999% chance you are connected to the grid. In other words, you get your electricity from the grid. But that grid can go down at times. You can get a lightning strike, high winds, somebody can run into a utility pole, a transformer can blow. There's any number of things that can happen to the grid to make it go down in your area. And when the grid goes down, you no longer have electricity. We commonly refer to that as a power outage too. You hear that, that is probably the most common term. But I refer to it as a grid down situation. Now, if you want to continue to have power during that grid down situation, you're going to need to generate it somewhere other than the grid. You're going to have to generate it locally, and there's several ways to do that. I have a solar and battery system. So that's what we want to look at in this video. You also hear the term off-grid. When I hear the term off-grid, I think that is somebody who is not connected to the grid at all. You know, they're living out in the mountains or somewhere where there's no grid access, so they generate whatever energy they need right at where they live. So that is considered off-grid. They're living off-grid. So with all of those definitions out of the way, let's take a look at my system, at how it handles a grid down situation. When the grid is functioning properly, my solar system can export excess electricity back to the grid as well as import electricity from it. This is made possible by a bidirectional meter. It is something that must be upgraded when a solar system is added. When the grid is operating normally, there are certain voltages and frequency it produces. Because I have solar and batteries, my home has the capability to form a microgrid. This microgrid also has voltages and frequencies that closely match the grid. Here is what it looks like when the grid is functioning normally. Here are the utility or grid side parameters, and here are my home's microgrid parameters. When the grid goes down, the voltages and frequency on the grid side drop to zero, and my system immediately switches to off-grid mode. This means my house forms its own microgrid with the electricity coming from my batteries and solar. This switch happens in the system controller. In the beginning, the batteries will be used exclusively to run my house. This is because solar energy can vary based on environmental conditions, and the battery energy is consistent. Here's a short clip of this happening. Notice my system is in off-grid mode and the grid is not connected. Once the battery's charge drops a few percentages, the solar can be activated to run the house and recharge the battery. Here is a still image of this happening during a recent grid down situation. Obviously, if the grid down situation happens at night, the batteries will run the house, and once the solar is available the next day, it can be used as needed. Once the grid side parameters come back, the system will go back into on-grid mode. What appliances I can run and for how long during a grid down situation will depend upon the capacity of my batteries. Here's my battery specs. It has 30 kilowatt hours of energy and 11.5 kilowatts of power. Before we go any further, it's very important to understand the difference between energy and power. Power is the amount of electricity flowing at a given point in time, whereas energy is the amount of electricity that is flowed over a given period of time. For example, if I turn on my air conditioner, the amount of electricity flowing would increase by 1.7 kilowatts. This is the power draw of my AC. If the AC ran for 1 hour straight, it would consume 1.7 kilowatt hours. If it ran for 2 hours straight, it would consume 3.4 kilowatt hours. This is the energy draw of my AC. As power increases, the length of time my batteries will last decreases. For example, my battery would only last 3 hours if the power output was at a constant 10 kilowatts. 30 kilowatt hours divided by 10 kilowatts equals 3 hours. As we saw, my battery can handle a maximum power draw of 11.5. This means during a grid down situation, I need to minimize my power draw to maximize my battery time. Well, how do I do this? Well, as we saw in the example, my AC draws 1.7 kilowatts of power. I need to know the power draw for the rest of my appliances. I would then be in a better position to manage my consumption during a grid down. Fortunately, Enphase has live status. This gives me real-time power output for my home. So what I can do is I can turn off everything in my home and then turn on an appliance to find out what the power output of that particular appliance is. This is what I did for my air conditioning in the earlier example. So I can do this for each one of the appliances and then find the power output of each one. So let's take a look at what I found. My home has a maximum baseline draw of 0.5 kilowatts. This includes appliances that are always on, refrigerator, Wi-Fi, clocks, etc. Beyond this, I have listed the appliances in descending order from highest power draw to lowest. You can see my central heat draws a constant 9.8 kilowatts. This is way too much, so I don't use my central heat during a grid down situation, so it's never going to be an issue. As I said in an earlier video, I have alternative ways of staying warm when it gets cold. Fortunately, here in Corpus Christi, we don't have that many cold days. You can see the next 5 have significant power draws. However, only the hot water heater's draw is constant. The values for the next 4 are peak power. This means the power draw varies while the appliance is on. This lowers their energy draw. Notice the dishwasher and clothes washer would have low power draws, but they both turn on the hot water heater to function. This significantly increases their draws. So how is this helpful? Remember, my battery has a maximum power draw of 11.5 kilowatts. This lets me know what appliances I can run at the same time during a grid down. For example, if I run my dishwasher and garbage disposal at the same time, it would produce a power output of 8.3 kilowatts, 5.9 plus 1.9 plus 0.5. This is under the 11.5 kilowatts my battery can handle. So as long as I keep my home's power output below 11.5, I'll be fine. A quick way to get an estimate of how long my battery will last during a grid down is to look at the status page on my Enphase app. It will tell me how long my battery will last based on my last 24 hours of consumption. So this is the power and energy that can be generated from my battery. But if solar is available during the grid down, I can also use the power and energy generated from it. Now this can add to my battery specs, and it will allow me to run more appliances during the grid down if I choose to. So that's it for this video. In my next video, I want to talk about how environmental conditions impact my solar production and consumption.